Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about the Altcoin Reckoning. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I have been traveling a lot over the last week and a half or so. I have sprinkled in a couple of live streams and maybe a couple pre-recorded videos while I was traveling, but for the most part, a lot of the videos that I've been providing you with were fairly short and on topics that were likely not going to change a lot in the span of a week. Of course, Bitcoin hasn't really changed at all over the last several weeks. But I do want to go into the details more so in this video. So this video will be a longer video on where we are, I think, within the altcoin reckoning. At what phase could the altcoin reckoning potentially be over? And how do you identify potential altcoins that might be included in the next bull run and have the potential to see new all-time highs? So we're going to talk about all that. We're also going to talk about some nuances behind Total 3 and the Bitcoin dominance, but I want to save that for the end of the video because I don't really think it's as relevant, but if you were looking closely, you would have seen some interesting dynamics with Total 3 and the Bitcoin dominance just over the last couple of days. So we'll talk about that at the end of the video if I can remember to do so. The fundamental idea behind the altcoin reckoning is that altcoins are in the process of bleeding against Bitcoin no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. This provided the framework for why the Bitcoin dominance should go higher. So if we rewind the clock and think back to a couple of years ago when the dominance was like 38, 39%, we talked back then about how the altcoin market should bleed back to Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin goes up or down. And ever since then, the price of Bitcoin has been all over the place. It's gone down a lot. It's gone up a lot. But at the end of the day, the total market cap of crypto remains relatively unchanged from, really from where it was about a year ago. And if you were to pull up total, you can see that, in fact, last August, the week of August 15th, and today is August 15th, the total market cap was at the same level that it is, in fact, at today. But during that time, we witnessed a rotation of capital away from higher risk assets like altcoins into lower risk assets like Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is still a risky asset, of course. We know that it is. We know that it can drop 50% overnight. We also know that it can go up relatively quickly too. But within the Cryptoverse, Bitcoin is a safer asset than the rest of the market. Now, if you look at, say, the equity market or other asset classes, that might be a different story. But within the Cryptoverse, Bitcoin is the relative safe haven. Okay, now you might say, well, what about stablecoins? Yes, stablecoins provide relative safety too, but over the last couple of years, even the stablecoin market has not always proven itself to be so stable. So what I want to do is go through systematically the larger view of the altcoin market. We'll then go into more of the details and talk about some individual altcoins. But I want to provide the framework for why I think the altcoin market is still in the process of bleeding against Bitcoin and how much longer that it could take. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand is that Total 3 is still below its bull market support band. So the bull market support band for Total 3, which consists of the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, ranges from approximately 347 to 349 billion. We're currently sitting at 343 billion. While there have been many exclamations for alt season, really ever since November of 2021, every single move by the altcoin market has been nothing more than a lower high. And even the move that occurred in April of this year, we said that it would likely go no higher than the low 400 billions. And you can see that it actually topped out right around 407 to 408 billion. This was in fact a lower high compared to October. Now think about that for Bitcoin. Bitcoin easily surpassed its October high of 2022. Whereas the altcoin market could not even muster up the courage to get above its October of 2022 and November of 2022 high. And it ended up putting in yet another lower high. And recently, in July, we had a potential another lower high on the altcoin market where it topped out at around $378 billion. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, I was about to go out of town on another trip, and right before I went out of town, we got the news of XRP and the SEC, so Ripple and the SEC. And on that day, we saw the altcoin market rally significantly in a single day. And I put out a video on that day, and I said, the altcoins are bouncing, but we said, is it different than what we fundamentally thought could happen? And at the time, I said, look, guys, this could simply turn into a wick, right? Yes, we were all the way up here in the 377 range, 377 billion, but it could be nothing more than a wick. And as time came to pass, you can see that, in fact, it was just a wick. The altcoin market here wicked a lot higher than where it ended up closing, to the tune of about 7%. So yes, during that day, there were a lot of people saying, well, there's no way you could have predicted the SEC versus Ripple. There's no way that, you could have known. But look, guys, there's always going to be a narrative as to why someone's going to call for alt season. But what do you see happen time and time again? These are nothing more than lower highs. Now, I would agree that we are likely witnessing some type of macro bottoming process on the altcoin market, but I would also say that there is a good chance that the altcoin market goes and eventually puts in a new low. You might say, well, Ben, that seems somewhat uncalled for. But I would say, look at this. This over here in March of 2020 was technically a lower low compared to 2018. Now, a counterpoint to that would be to say, well, this was a black swan. You can't use that. Well, sure I can. We had an inverted yield curve in 2019. We got a recession in 2020. We have an inverted yield curve in 2022 and 2023. Maybe we'll have a recession in late 2023 or early 2024, which could be the final low on the altcoin market before the altcoin reckoning is finally over. But as I've said many, many times, the altcoin reckoning is more so dependent on their Bitcoin pairs. I'm showing you the USD valuation just because I do know a lot of people care about it. And I do think there's some fundamental value to at least occasionally looking at, but we're going to spend most of the video looking at Bitcoin pairs. You'll also see here that the altcoin market continues to get rejected, in fact, by the 50-week moving average, okay? And the reason why that's relevant is because if you remember, we've talked a lot about how this is compared to the NASDAQ during the dot-com crash. And at this point, as much as I think a lot of people, would say that it's deviated, I don't know that you can really say that it has. In fact, if you look back, if you roll back the clock on the NASDAQ drop, you can even see the double top that occurred right here. You can see that we had a double top on total 3 that went above the 20-week SMA. Just like here, total 3, we're getting that double top in the beginning part of this year that went just above the 20-week SMA. And then what happened after the NASDAQ had that double top? It came back down and then back tested the bull market support band and rejected it. It rejected it. Now remember, this rejection also corresponded to a rejection off of the 50-week moving average. And from that point, the altcoin market proceeded to drop by another 50% or so over the next 30 weeks. Okay? We can see that that's what happened. Now, is that what's going to happen in the altcoin market today? I couldn't tell you. But I will say we've tracked this for well over a year and a half to 2 years now. It hasn't deviated yet. There's a chance that it could deviate at some point, but it hasn't done so yet. And I still look at this and say, well, is there just simply the same risk that exists where we actually go back down on the altcoin market, potentially to new lows, just like the NASDAQ did more than 20 years ago? Now, that would bring up the question, what could possibly send the altcoin market any lower? Has it not already been beaten up enough? Well, I would pose this question to you. If the altcoin market is so strong, why is it below the 20-week SMA? Why is it below the 50-week SMA when Bitcoin has been above the 20-week SMA for basically the entire year? If you were to look at the Bitcoin chart, you'll see that it actually got above the 20-week SMA the first or second week of January, and it's more or less been above it ever since with a couple of deviations below. During this entire time, the altcoin market was unable to convincingly break out and hold the 20-week SMA as support. So during a risk-on environment with stocks and crypto, during a risk-on environment, the altcoin market could not even be bothered to take out its late 2022 high, which was still a relatively lackluster high given the circumstances, okay? Especially considering what the stock market started to do just after that. So in a risk-on environment where the S&P climbed in October from 3490 all the way up to 4600, in a risk-on environment, the altcoin market looks like this. So then when you ask me what could cause the altcoin market to do something like this, well, it's simple. It's just, does Bitcoin fall below the 20-week SMA? Do we go into a risk-off environment? Remember, the altcoin market has been stuck in traffic on struggle street with Bitcoin being risk-on. So what happens to the altcoin market if Bitcoin goes risk-off? Now, is there any seasonality to Bitcoin dropping below the 20-week SMA during August or September of the pre-halving year? Well, I'm glad you asked, right? Because there is. Every single pre-halving year, we have seen Bitcoin drop below the 20-week SMA in August or September, okay? So 2019, September, we fell below the 20-week SMA. Altcoins got crushed, absolutely crushed, and many of them put in new lows. 2015, altcoins got crushed when Bitcoin fell below the 20-week SMA in August. 2011, altcoins got crushed. Well, maybe not so much as 2011 because there wasn't really a lot of altcoins around. But you can imagine if there were altcoins around, they would have been crushed, right? A huge drop over here. And every single time that Bitcoin fell below the 20-week SMA in the pre-halving year, it always occurred in August or September. Always. Every single time. August or September of the pre-halving year. Now, why is that? What made crypto go risk off in August or September of the pre-halving year that led Bitcoin to dropping below the 20-week SMA and leading to the capitulation of the altcoin market? It was the S&P 500, right? It was traditional markets. Not just the S&P, but it was traditional markets. And we said this many, many times going into August or September that in the pre-election year, in August or September, we tend to go into a risk-off environment. I don't know why, right? I mean, there's all sorts of reasons we can talk about. We can talk about taxes. We can talk about how there might be people start to look at uncertainty as we get closer to the election year. Couldn't really tell you what the exact reason is, to be completely honest, right? I mean, you can come up with a narrative for anything. But I can say that if you look at the seasonality of the S&P 500, okay? This is 2023 year-to-date ROI. This is the average. Let me just show you this is what all of them look like, going all the way back to 1928. Every year-to-date ROI of the S&P 500. Now look at 2023 and take the average of all the pre-election years. This is what it looks like. You can see how in August or September, there tends to be a risk-off dynamic that emerges. And we talked about this going into August. We said, look, there's a good chance that the S&P is going to correct here. And it has. And it's precisely that correction that normally drops Bitcoin below its 20-week moving average, right? And you can see this very clearly if you look at just 2019. It was this risk-off time in the S&P that knocked Bitcoin below the 20-week SMA right here. And if you go back and look at 2015, you will see yet again there is a risk-off play right here in the S&P, and it knocked Bitcoin down 50% to double bottom by August of the pre-halving year. And in 2011, you will see the same thing. A pretty big risk-off move, and the S&P dropped a lot. And in all three cases, it sent Bitcoin below the bull market support band. So the thesis behind the altcoin market and the altcoin reckoning is that they get wrecked on their Bitcoin pairs no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, whether Bitcoin goes up or down, right? Well, they have been wrecked a lot as Bitcoin went down and as Bitcoin has gone up. But there is a fundamental risk right now from a seasonality perspective that says if Bitcoin gets a weekly close here below the 20-week SMA, then that leads to a risk-off dynamic and the altcoin market could get crushed, right? Let me deviate for a minute because there's an interesting trend that if you weren't squinting, you may have missed it. Look at this on a daily time frame. Look at the 20-week moving average, right? So it's this red line. And you can see there were a few days here in June where Bitcoin was below the 20-week SMA. Now what I want to do is I want to pull up Ether Bitcoin on the same chart. Okay, this is really interesting if you haven't looked at this before. Now, here, what I want to do is I want to flip it upside down. Okay, so perhaps instead of looking at Ether Bitcoin, what I really want to do is I want to look at 1 over Ether Bitcoin, right? So we'll look at Ether Bitcoin, and yeah, we'll just go with this one, and we'll say 1 over Ether Bitcoin. And you get something that looks like this. So when you overlay, right, when you overlay Bitcoin USD onto this chart, you see a pretty good comparison here, right? So you see that Bitcoin has been as Bitcoin has gone up, so too, right? So too did 1 over Ether Bitcoin, meaning Bitcoin outperformed Ethereum, right? Bitcoin outperformed Ethereum. But when we look at 1 over Ether Bitcoin and compare this to the Bitcoin dominance, you will see that the Bitcoin dominance has gone up so long as Bitcoin USD has gone up, right? But sometimes when Bitcoin goes down, we saw the Bitcoin dominance go down. But something changes when Bitcoin goes below the 20-week SMA in the pre-halving year. You have to squint to see it, right? Look at this. Look really, really closely at this. So remember, this is 1 over Ether Bitcoin. Okay, so if this is going up, it means that Bitcoin is outperforming ETH. Okay? Look at this. Here, you can see right here that Bitcoin, we know that Bitcoin here around this time went below the 20-week moving average. And it was in this phase when the dominance of Bitcoin shot up. But look at this. The dominance was going up here, even though Bitcoin USD, we know, wasn't even moving, right? If you don't believe me, let's just go look really quick, right? Bitcoin USD wasn't really moving in here. It was putting in daily closes below the 20-week moving average, but the dominance was going up. But remember, earlier in the year, when the dominance was going up, it was because Bitcoin was going up. And anytime Bitcoin hesitated, then the altcoin market started to gain some back on Bitcoin. But there is a brief window here that if you really pay attention to, you can see right here. As Bitcoin got some daily closes below the 20-week SMA, the dominance started to move higher very quickly. If you blink, you miss it, right? If you blink, you miss it. And the dominance continued to go up once Bitcoin rebounded. But what happens if we get weekly closes below the 20-week SMA because of this seasonality by Bitcoin USD? That's where the altcoin market gets crushed, especially on their Bitcoin pairs. Now, you might say, well, Ben, I mean, the altcoin market's already been crushed. I mean, go take a look at any random altcoin. Most of them are down 90% or more. So why do they need to be crushed even more? Well, I'm glad you asked again. Look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. So this is subtracting out the at least USDT. This shows us pretty clearly, in fact, that the altcoin market tends to peak out at parity with Bitcoin. So when the altcoin market cap is equivalent to Bitcoin's market cap, that indicates a significant top, right? This is at 1. Let me just look at the y-axis over here, right? At 1, when the altcoin market reaches Bitcoin's market cap. That's where the altcoin market tends to top. You can also see some significant bottoms here in altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs in September 2019 and in June of 2020, May of 2020. Now, we also saw a capitulation below this line with altcoins just before the real alt season occurred, okay? Now, I want you to think about how many times someone in the Cryptoverse has promised you alt season over the last 2 years. Where is it, right? I don't see it. I haven't seen it anywhere. It's because people constantly dream of alt season, right? This thing right here, this rally by the altcoin market, it happens like once every 3 or 4 years, and then people then just spend the next 3 or 4 years constantly predicting it, right? Eventually, they probably will be right. But also, the altcoins that they maybe hold could be very different than the ones that actually rally. There's a good chance that the total 3 market cap eventually puts in a new high. But just because it goes to a high does not mean the altcoins that you hold go to a new high. Well, hopefully they do, right? But it doesn't mean they have to. It could be because a new class of altcoins are created and they go to new highs. And there are some from prior cycles that will likely put in new highs as well. So when you look at this chart, you see that the altcoin market tends to top out at parity with Bitcoin, and it tends to bottom with the exception of this sort of final capitulation of alt Bitcoin pairs here during the parabolic rally by Bitcoin at 25% of Bitcoin's market cap. This would still call for another 45% drop on alt Bitcoin pairs. If you were to include Ethereum in this, you might look at this like, if you include Ethereum, you could see that it come back down here to 35% of Bitcoin's market cap, which is where it bottomed here in September 2019, double bottom in December 2020. It would require another 58% drop. I have been in so many discussions, is a nice way to say it, with people on Twitter about the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. And, I still do remain very bearish on the Ether Bitcoin valuation. And I have been since about 0.075. Okay. So, when I look at this, I have seen nothing more than lower highs and lower lows ever since the merge. I've heard nothing. I mean, I of course, you'll hear people scream out, it's deflationary, the tokenomics are changed. You can't look at this stuff. But I've said the same thing many, many times. If the tokenomics, if that aspect mattered so much, why is it a series of lower highs and lower lows, right? If the merge was going to lead to ETH flipping Bitcoin, why didn't it do so already, right? If it was all of a sudden superior, or at least hold the levels that it rallied to. But no, it was a bunch of hype, which was, by the way, a lower high compared to December of 2021. And if you really want to piss people off, you show them that the December 2021 high was a lower high compared to January 2018, which was a lower high compared to June of 2017. Now, the gotcha moment that a lot of people get me with, or they try to, is they'll say, well, these are higher lows as well. Well, yes, they are. And I was actually very bullish on the Ether Bitcoin valuation right here. In fact, the very first video on my channel is right there. And we talk about the Ether Bitcoin pair, and we talk about how it's undervalued, right? So yes, higher lows. But if you're going to point out the higher lows, be willing to point out the lower highs, right? And I can't help but look at Heikin-Ashi monthly candles for the Ether Bitcoin valuation and just look at this and say, is this not a distribution phase just like we had last cycle? Is it not? Could it be? People say it's holding up well. Maybe, but it also didn't go nearly as high as last cycle, right? I mean, last cycle it went up to 0.15. This cycle, it only got up to 0.08. I mean, it didn't even make it to 0.09. So perhaps the only reason it's holding up as well as it is because it actually never reached these mania phases up here. It doesn't mean that it can't come back down. And what if it does, right? Then what do they stand on, right? What if Ether Bitcoin capitulates? Then what is the next excuse for why it's going down? Look at the Ether Bitcoin Heikin-Ashi candles for 2023. They've all been red, right? I mean, it's just been a downtrend. It's just been nothing more to the downtrend. The dominance has gone up because of it. And the issue here is that if it actually capitulates going into the end of the year, then it's likely going to take the altcoin market with it. Now, remember, we talked a little bit here about how when Bitcoin got these daily closes, we saw Ethereum start to underperform right away, right? We saw it underperform almost immediately once Bitcoin got below the 20-week SMA. So if the S&P 500 remains risk off for long enough, which it tends to do in August or September of the pre-election year, it can lead to Bitcoin going below the 20-week SMA and staying there in August or September of the pre-election year, which would then in turn lead to the capitulation of the altcoin market. And if the altcoin market, if Total 3 can't even be bothered to take out its October 2022 high in a risk-on environment, then of course it could go put in a new low in a risk-off environment, just like the NASDAQ did more than 20 years ago. Okay? We have to be open-minded to this possibility. Doesn't mean that it has to happen, right? It doesn't mean that it has to happen. And in fact, there's part of me that hopes for the people that have ignored my warnings on the altcoin market that hopefully they have an altcoin that doesn't capitulate, because I've experienced that pain before, and I want you to know that I say these things not because I have any specific agenda. I don't. Okay, I'm not monetizing. I don't run ads on this channel, right? Ads. How many AdSense is turned off? Okay, I do it because I experienced the pain many times of holding the altcoins all the way down, and many of them never saw new all-time highs again. So yes, if Bitcoin gets a close below the 20-week, then of course the altcoin market could go put in new lows. And we said this last year. I said, look, there's a chance that even if Bitcoin does put in a lower high or a double bottom or maybe even a lower low, but even if it doesn't put in a lower low, the altcoin market could go put in new lows, and many of them did. Many. ADA, AVAX, Link, Polkadot, all of them have put in new lows already this year, right? Look at ADA. This was a new low. Look at Polkadot, new low. Link, new low. AVAX, new low. Could it be a double bottom? Maybe. What if it's not? What if it's just like a descending triangle or something and it breaks down again? The altcoin market is a brutal place. I mean, I will say that. It's a brutal place. And a lot of these can just keep getting hammered further and further and further down. And there are going to be 1,000 people in the Cryptoverse that will tell you to buy the dip every step of the way. And they will mock anyone who says anything differently. Okay? And I've seen it at each lower high. At each lower high, I've seen these people come out and mock the Altcoin Reckoning because of the most recent pump in the altcoin market. And where are they when it goes back down? Just telling you to buy the dip because that's all they're ever going to do. But I'm telling you, the altcoin market is a very risky asset class. And if you're going to navigate it, you best understand their Bitcoin pairs. So let's talk about that. The Bitcoin dominance is now above 50%. Okay? And I've said many times that altcoin accumulation, in my opinion, not financial advice, but in my opinion, should not really start until the Bitcoin dominance is at 60%. We're not at 60%. Therefore, I don't think it's time for the altcoin market. I think that as we explained over here, well, I guess I moved the chart, but as I explained on Total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, it looks like the altcoin market needs to bleed. Now, there's a chance that it bleeds because Bitcoin goes up. There's also a good chance it bleeds because Bitcoin goes down. Probably going to be a combination of both of those. But if the altcoin market collectively drops 45% against Bitcoin, why would I hold something besides Bitcoin and crypto? No, I'm not saying that you need to be 100% into Bitcoin. In fact, I'm also heavy cash right now because I think there is a good chance that Bitcoin gets that secondary scare. A lot of times, Bitcoin gets a secondary scare. And in fact, if you look at every prior high by Bitcoin in the pre-halving year, we have always seen at least a 40 to 50% correction before the halving. Always. Right? Don't take my word for it. Here it is. I'm not even going to take it from the high. Let's just take it from August. 80% correction. Take it from July of the pre-halving year. 48, 49% correction. Take it from July of the pre-halving year. 73%, 72% correction. If you're going to talk about the cycles, you have to be willing to look at the secondary scare that Bitcoin normally gets. Now, a lot of people say this time's different and that it won't happen, but I don't know. I mean, I've heard that narrative before and it's never played out. So, is there a chance that the ETF, spot ETF, gets approved and saves the day? Maybe, but even if it does, there's still a good chance that even if it rallies, it might just be sort of one final rally just to suck that liquidity back in, only to then roll back over and to crush the altcoin market. Okay? I've seen a lot of comments, people say, well, why do you hate the altcoin market so much? I don't hate it. It's just being pragmatic, right? I mean, it's just being objective. Do I buy the dip on the altcoins just because they have a great community? Or do I say, no, excess liquidity is drying up, and whatever narrative is being spun this week, I don't want to hear it. Look at the altcoin market again. Do you remember when we had the Ripple SEC case news came out? And we got this wick? Do you remember that? And then we've seen the market just bleed back down ever since. One thing that I think is difficult is that there's always going to be a narrative. But remember, price does not follow the narrative. The narrative follows price. Okay? And fundamentally, when net liquidity, which is a combination of the central bank's balance sheets, I think I have the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the ECB, UK, China, and Japan in there. I also subtract out the TGA and the reverse repo. When you overlay this to the altcoin market, what do you get? You see that altcoins are essentially nothing more than tracking excess liquidity. Why is that? I mean, the S&P doesn't really track excess liquidity in the same way. The altcoin market doesn't have the same utility that maybe something else would give you, like a tech stock. Okay? If you're going to go out and buy shares of Apple, you know that they're making a ton of money selling iPhones or whatever, right? When you go out and buy an altcoin, you're just hoping you don't get rugged next week. Okay? Imagine if altcoin community, if they had earnings calls, right? I've said this before, right? If they had earnings calls. Hey, we only got rugged twice this past quarter, but our community is great. You kind of understand why the altcoin market is more so a function of excess liquidity than anything else, right? So no, I don't hate altcoins. I see them as providing huge potential if you don't blow all your money in them buying the dip all the way down, okay? It only takes one bull market to change your life. It really does. If last cycle you had ignored altcoins from here to here, do you think you would have cared if you missed out on all these little rallies that, by the way, were just lower highs? This lower high came in the halving year. In the halving year. We're not even in the halving year yet. Do you think you would have cared if you missed out on all that? If you bought the secondary scare by Bitcoin and you loaded up on some choice altcoins then, and then watched the altcoin market rally? How much? How much is that? Almost 4,000%? Did it matter if you missed out on everything else? No, because you preserved your capital and you watched the Bitcoin dominance go up and you got into the altcoin market when they were done bleeding against Bitcoin, when the dominance was above 60%, well above 60 in fact. It only takes one bull market, okay? So I don't hate altcoins. I think they can provide a vehicle to increase your wealth. But not if you're going to just YOLO all your money into every dip all the way down. Because what a lot of people think is that, well, this altcoin will eventually recover. A lot of them won't, okay? A lot of them won't. I don't say that to be mean. I just say it because I've experienced it. I used to think they all would in cycles of the past. And I saw time and time again how Bitcoin would go put in new highs in the altcoin market. Some would go put in new highs. But most of the ones that rallied were new coins, not old ones. Please be aware, okay? When will it be over, right? I think the Altcoin Reckoning will likely be over within, well, it depends on what we mean exactly. But I think that in general, there is a good chance that altcoins that will survive could bottom out against Bitcoin if they haven't already done so, which I think many of them have not, within the next 6 to 8 months, okay? Within the next 6 to 8 months, I think there's a good chance that many of them will bottom out. I might even go as far to say, hey, maybe February of 2024. is the time. But I don't know. We'll have to take it one step at a time and kind of see what happens. I also know that if it plays out like last cycle and we do get a recession, there is a good chance that altcoins could rally into that recession just like they did over here. So you have to be careful for that as well, right? I mean, imagine something like that were to happen. And that'd be difficult to navigate as well. But these have all just been lower highs, okay? So I want to talk about the dominance a little bit. So the dominance of Bitcoin has broken out from this 49% level, consolidated a bit, and I ultimately think we're going to head higher. I don't think that the dominance spent 2 years in this zone to just have a false breakout, okay? When we broke out over here, we sort of consolidated for a little bit and then headed higher. It's taking a bit longer this time, but arguably that's just because there's a lot more liquidity that has to be removed, right? There's just arguably because there's a lot more liquidity that needs to be removed from the market. So the dominance is now at 50%. I've said before, I want to see 60% dominance before the altcoin market even piques my interest. We're not there yet. Now, how do we get there? Is it coins like ADA that get us there? Dropping another 50%? Last cycle, ADA went to 400 sats. I don't see why it can't do it again. It's already below 1,000. And the people that are the most vocal and criticize me about this view were the same people that were vocal about it at 1,600 sats and 2,400 sats, right? They weren't telling you it was going to go down to 800 sats. And they're also not going to tell you it's going to go down to 400. But I think there's a good chance that it will go down to 400 Satoshis, and that will be a tailwind for dominance. But it won't make a big difference. Maybe it'll move the needle a little, but not a lot. What about Bitcoin? It's just been going down. If it drops another 50%, is it going to make a difference? Probably not. Well, this goes on and on. So what needs to happen, right? Well, you guys already know. Ether Bitcoin needs to fall. And I've said before, in the end, even the giants will fall. And I think it will. I mean, I think before this is all said and done, this will fall. And if you look at seasonality on the Ether Bitcoin pair, what you will find is that on average, from June to December, they're red months. In the pre-halving year of 2019, we got 5 of the last 7 months of the year were red. So far, we've had June that's red, July was green, just barely, kind of like how November of 2019 was barely green. But I think there's a good chance that, for the next 5 months are red for the Ether Bitcoin pair. And if that's the case, then you could very well see this collapse on down and lead to the finalization of the Altcoin Reckoning. So please be aware that I do think the Altcoin Reckoning is still going on. I think that it needs to last for another 6 to 8 months at most. It could wrap up before then, for all I know. It depends on how quickly things move. And also know that I don't hate the altcoin market like a lot of people say. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi like a lot of people say, but I have experienced these cycles on more than one occasion, and I've just seen it play out this way on more than one occasion. And I just don't expect this time to be any different. I think there's a good chance it'll play out the same way that it always does. Now, there's also this idea about social risk that we've talked about, and I've said this many times. If you look at the altcoin season index indicator, you'll notice that, and we take a 30-day moving average, you'll see that we came out of this Bitcoin season, which we talked about. I mean, I said I think we're going to go down deep into Bitcoin season. We are now coming out of it. Now, that's led some people to say, well, that means the altcoin market has to go up, right? There's 3 times in history that we can look at to compare to when the 30-day SMA of the altcoin season index on the 90-day ROI timeframe hit these lows. 2020, 2018, and 2017. In 2017, altcoins skyrocketed after, just like they did in 2020. But in 2018, they got crushed. Look at the social risk. Does this look like 2020 to you, where social risk was putting in higher lows and higher highs? 2016, 2017, social risk was putting in higher lows and higher highs? Or does it look like 2018 and 2019, where you were getting lower highs and lower lows for the most part? I would argue this looks more like this than it does these two. Therefore, if you are buying altcoins with the expectation you're going to flip it in 2 months, who's the marginal buyer? I mean, people are leaving. You don't believe me? What goes into this, because the YouTube subs, YouTube views, Twitter analysts, Twitter exchanges or exchanges on Twitter and their ones on Twitter. And if you go look at, say, like YouTube views for a lot of the different crypto YouTubers, this is what it looks like, right? So who's the marginal buyer? And like zoom in here. Views are, just in July, views were averaging almost 900,000, 862,000. Now they're averaging 600,000. So who's the marginal buyer of the altcoin that you hold when people are leaving the cryptoverse? And again, they're leaving because excess liquidity is drying up, as we showed earlier, right? They're leaving because excess liquidity is drying up. That's why. We're in a tightening cycle. The Fed is reducing the size of their balance sheet. It's difficult. Inflation's high. So, bank accounts are going down. Liquidity is drying up. When liquidity dries up, the riskiest assets get hit first. That's why the altcoin market has tracked net liquidity so well. Okay? So, looking at this, to me, I'm still not convinced it's not just, somewhere over here. I don't think it's 2016, 2017. I don't think it's 2019, 2020, and early 2021. I think this more looks like over here where social risk was going down. Hopefully this makes sense. So, there's a lot of things that we could look at, but the other thing I want to talk about is, how do you identify altcoins that might put in a new high in a future cycle? How do you do that? Well, what I did last cycle, I'll tell you what I did last cycle and it worked out. We'll see if it works out again. I don't know. But last cycle, there were several different altcoins that you could have looked at. And, one of them was ADA, in fact. And there's no guarantee that ADA puts in a new high, but I'm just saying what you look for is you look for a bottoming process on the Bitcoin valuation, right? You see this here in 2019 through the halving year, through the early part of the halving year, ADA Bitcoin was holding its low, okay? And there were wicks showing that there was a lot of demand in that 400 sat range. A lot of demand down there. It gave you the idea that altcoin, don't marry an altcoin, by the way. I don't care how great the community is. Don't marry one, okay? Just look to the data. It showed you that there was demand for it at 400 Satoshis. Therefore, perhaps the reckoning was over for ADA in 2019, 2020. And it was. And what ended up happening to ADA USD? What ended up happening? It put in new highs. Many altcoins did not put in new highs. Let's find an example of ones that didn't and what they were doing. Dash Bitcoin is a good example. Look at Dash Bitcoin in 2019. When ADA Bitcoin was holding its lows, Dash Bitcoin was not. Never held its lows. Every time it retested the low, it just put on a new low. That told you that it likely was not going to put in new highs on its USD pair. It didn't mean that the USD pair couldn't rally. If you print $6 trillion, yeah, it can rally. But look, no holding on its Bitcoin pair. And it still isn't. Even today, Dash Bitcoin is putting in new lows. Even today. This is the 2017 top. You don't even see the 2021 or 2020 bull market in Dash Bitcoin because it never bottomed out. Look at Dash USD. What do you see going on Dash USD? Did it rally in 2020? Yeah. But it was a lower high. Okay? The peak in 2017 was $1,600. The peak in 2021, $483. It became a relic of a prior cycle. And had you looked at it on its Bitcoin pair, you would have already known that. You didn't have to wait to see if it was going to go put out a new high. You already known it's probably not going to. It never bottomed out against Bitcoin. If it can't bottom out against a lower risk asset, then how is it going to go put in a new high? Right? It's probably not. There's plenty of examples, right? Plenty. I mean, Litecoin Bitcoin is one, right? Does it ever stop putting in new lows? Does it ever? It put in a new low in July 2022, right? Did it ever find a bottom on its Bitcoin pair in 2019 or 2020? No, it did not. Did it make significantly new all-time highs? Maybe it double topped, slightly higher, but that's it, right? It didn't go 3 to 4 times the prior all-time high like Bitcoin did or Ethereum did or Cardano did. It did not. It barely took it out. But you would have already known that it wasn't likely going to do that well because it never bottomed out on its Bitcoin pair, right? It never did. You would have known that Ether was going to do well because it bottomed out, right? It had a test here in September 2019, and then it held it, and then it started moving back up. So you can learn a lot by their Bitcoin pairs. If you only looked at Dash USD last cycle, you wouldn't have necessarily known that it couldn't go to new highs or significant new highs. But if you looked at the Bitcoin pair, it would have told you a lot. It's like if you were to look at Monero. Monero Bitcoin has actually done pretty well, I believe, since 2022 started. It's pulled back a lot recently, right? But last cycle, it really never bottomed out. It just kept going lower and lower and lower. And what do you think Monero USD did last cycle? So I'm not really sure what that wick is, right? Very similar to what Litecoin did, right? Where it went back up, but not a very significant new high. This is the way I think you look for altcoins this cycle, right? You look for ones that at the very least are putting in higher lows or some type of a bottoming process on their Bitcoin pairs. Another good example last cycle was Link Bitcoin. Go look at Link Bitcoin last cycle. I gotta get a chart that goes further back. Link Bitcoin. Here we go. So it still doesn't go far enough back. I don't remember which, it's probably this one. So Link Bitcoin last cycle was putting in higher lows, right? Higher lows, even in 2019. That told you that come the bull market, it was probably going to do pretty well. And it did, right? I mean, if you look at Link USD, it did do really well, right? It did really, really well. But you would have already known that it was probably going to do well because it was doing well on its Bitcoin pair. So all you needed to know was that the Bitcoin pair was holding up pretty well, and therefore it was likely going to participate in the next bull market. Now, is it a surefire thing? No, because any altcoin, it could be putting in higher lows, it could be doing something, but maybe the developer rugs the project, right? Or there's an exploit, right? There's no guarantee in these markets. The altcoin market is incredibly risky, and Bitcoin is by far a much safer play. I want to show you something too. There's this DCA simulation tool that we have on the website now. By the way, you don't need a paid account into the Cryptoverse to access this. There is a free tier, and this DCA tool is available to you on the free tier. Okay, so if you look at this going back to, say, 2022, January, and a DCA of Bitcoin of $100 every week, that represents this green line. You're currently in the money. For a long time, you would have been out of the money, right? But you're currently in the money on your investment, right? You would have invested by this point about $8,300, and it's currently worth $96.45. Let's say you had invested in Cardano, Solana, and I don't know, Polkadot instead, and even Ethereum, right? Let's say you invested in those instead. You would have been better off with Bitcoin. Ethereum, your Ether DCA strategy would have underperformed Bitcoin to the tune of about 9%. Solana would have underperformed Bitcoin DCA strategy to the tune of 25%. DOT 41% to the downside. ADA 43% to the downside. So Bitcoin would have been the safer play, and only out of these random ones that I just picked, only Bitcoin and ETH actually would have outperformed your initial investment amount or your DCA amount at this point. So what happens if this comes back down? If Bitcoin comes back down, it crushes the altcoin market even more, right? And we've seen that happen many, many times in the past. So just consider that this is something we have seen many, many times, right? And another way to visualize this too, by the way, is to look at the, I'm trying to figure out where it is. Yeah, the price drawdown from the all-time high. Look at this chart. Look at it for Cardano. Look at this. Look how long it lasted before it ever recovered. Look at it on its Bitcoin pair. You can't even say yet that it's convincingly found a bottom, right? At least over here, it looked like it actually found a bottom. Here, it's too early to say, and it probably hasn't, right? It probably will go to 400 Satoshis. Look at, look at Solana Bitcoin, right? Is it bottoming out? We'll see. It's too early to say yet because we haven't reached the phase of Bitcoin USD in a downtrend. Once Bitcoin USD enters a downtrend, which will likely occur at some point, that's when you look to see which altcoins hold their Bitcoin support levels. Okay? We have not reached that point yet. I wanted to comment on a couple of things here. For those who are astute observers, you might have noticed that the dominance gapped down yesterday and then actually gapped back up today, and that total 3 gapped down or gapped up. And I wanted to at least talk about a little bit about that. So here, the dominance, you can see that's just kind of, it was up here and then now it's all the way down here. If you go to the definition of total, it's made up by the top 125 cryptocurrencies. That's why you'll find differences between the dominance on TradingView, which is at like 50.3%, versus CoinMarketCap, which is at 48.7%. Which, by the way, if you go to my website and look at the Bitcoin dominance, including stables, it's at 48.77%. So mine's at 48.77. CoinMarketCap has it at 48.7, but TradingView has it at 50.29. Yesterday, we saw it gap down to around 49.6, 49.7. And the reason for that, and I reached out to them and they responded, was because they were exploring adding new coins to what makes up the total market cap. The issue is that if you include them all at once, if you include a lot at once, it then distorts everything, right? Because for a few minutes or for about a day or so, the total 3 market cap was above the bull market support band, right? But it wasn't really above it if you didn't include new coins. Now, I'm not petty to the point to say that it can't ever change, right? It could change, and I think it's fine that if it does change. But the issue is that if you just include it all at once, then it's going to have a pretty large gap up, and we saw it trading up here at the $357 billion range. Like $17 billion of market cap was added, but the market didn't really move, right? Now, the reason that becomes an issue is because it was above the 20-week SMA. Now, had those coins always been included, then the entire chart would have been shifted upwards and it would have likely still been below the 20-week SMA. So I don't know exactly what process they're going to use to change this, but I do think they're probably in the process of doing something based on what they said to me on Twitter. You can see their interaction with me on Twitter. And I wouldn't be surprised you can still see that there is a little bit of a gap here. So perhaps they've included some more coins to total 3. Maybe they're going to incrementally include more. I don't really know. I don't really know what their plans are, but I do know there's a chance they will add more. And if it's okay that if they do, it's fine. I want people to be aware that could happen. And if it does happen, it could lead to some of these indicators not being as useful for a while because new things have been added, right? If you're going to add new coins all at once, then I would suggest retroactively changing all the prior candles to also incorporate those coins and what they would have done had they been included in that data set. If you only, if you just throw in another 50 coins on one daily candle but don't include them in the prior candles, then yes, it's going to lead to a gap down in the Bitcoin dominance. It's going to lead to a gap up in the altcoin market, even if your portfolio valuation didn't change at all. Okay, it's just more of an accounting thing rather than any fundamental thing actually occurring in the market, right? So we talked about Bitcoin and where it is. We've talked about how if the S&P continues this risk-off dynamic, and by the way, this is also where bonds are going down too. You have stocks and bonds going down. We talked about this likely entering a several-week window where this happens. If this continues where S&P 500 goes down, and risk asset or equities go down, it could knock Bitcoin below the 20-week SMA. If it does, it'll likely lead to altcoins capitulating on their Bitcoin pairs, and we could be entering into the latter stages of the altcoin reckoning. I think there's a good chance that the altcoin reckoning could be over probably within the next 6 to 8 months or so. and that the thing to look for any individual altcoin is to look to see if it's bottoming out on its Bitcoin pair or not. Now, when I say the altcoin reckoning could be over in 6 to 8 months, that's only for the altcoins that will survive. As I showed you earlier, there's going to be plenty of altcoins that will likely never stop bleeding on their Bitcoin pairs. So do recognize that the altcoin reckoning for some altcoins will never actually be over. They'll just continue to bleed forever. If you want to find altcoins that will likely be a part of the next bull run, then I would say look to see which ones are bottoming out on their Bitcoin pairs. And that is how you can at least have some insight into the likelihood of it outperforming. Even in that case, there's no guarantees. There's always a chance that, the altcoin has, it can be exploited. There's always a chance that something like that could happen. But that's just something to consider. And then the last thing I want to say is I do think there is some risk, and I was talking about this earlier on another channel. There is some risk in the sort of the DeFi space, the Ethereum. I mean, if you look at, I've been following a lot of the NFT space recently to look, because I know there's a lot of liquidity, or a lot of people that have a lot of NFTs, and you can see that there has been some movement recently, especially in some of the larger cap ones that have been slowly going down, and there could be a race to the exits there as well, which could flood the market with a lot of ETH, and that could also lead to the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation going down a lot. So just something to think about. I know the altcoin reckoning videos are not appreciated by many people, especially if you're knee deep in altcoins, but hopefully now that we've been in the altcoin reckoning for so long, you can at least appreciate why I've been screaming from the rooftops for almost 2 years now, why the altcoin market is likely bleeding against Bitcoin. And for those people that point out that the dominance only bottomed in September 2022, I will humbly remind you that when you exclude stablecoins, it actually bottomed out all the way back in May of 2021. And if you want to be really honest with yourself, it actually has not put in a new low since January of 2018. If you're going to point out the lower highs on Bitcoin dominance, then point out the higher lows. If you're going to point out if you're going to point out the higher lows on Ether Bitcoin, then also point out the lower highs. You need to be objective, okay? And I see that we haven't seen a new high on Ether Bitcoin since July or June, July of 2017. I think we'll wrap it up there. Remember, we do have ITC Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. You can find links for all that down in the description below. We talk about a lot of different things. We talk about the macroverse, we talk about equity markets, and of course we talk about cryptocurrencies. But there's a lot of things to talk about, and I don't want to keep going on with this video because it's gone on long enough. Hopefully this video has been useful to you in understanding where we are within the altcoin reckoning, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.